All right, so let's get an update on what's happening in Gaza. Israel's Defense Force continues its incursion into the Hamas-controlled territory. Of course, on the 7th of October, Hamas militants crossed into Israel, attacking and killing civilians, taking at least 150 people hostage. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to destroy Hamas. It is estimated as many as 1 million people could have moved now from the north to the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, with grave humanitarian concerns. And I'm joined now by Carrie Keller-Lynn. She is a political and legal correspondent for the Times of Israel. And Carrie, thank you so much for joining us. I wonder if you could just give us, as a start, the very latest on the Israeli military action in Gaza. What is happening in Gaza?
Well, Sally, as you mentioned, we are 10 days into a war that was kicked off by the most costliest terror event against Jewish lives since the Holocaust 78 years ago. And right now we are sort of in a holding pattern. The Israel Defense Forces, which has been shelling Gaza and I think has about over 3,000 air raid strikes against Hamas targets over the past 10 days, is preparing for a ground offensive. It said that it will invade, presumably, north of Gaza Strip. And I say the north because Israel has opened humanitarian corridors and encouraged all civilians to evacuate from the north to the south. That is why, as you noted, about 1 million Gazans are so far displaced. Unfortunately, Hamas, which is the terror organization that fully controls the Gaza Strip, has been documented preventing its citizens from leaving, has actually been taking car keys, throwing them away, has been rocketing and shooting at civilians when they try to flee to the south because Hamas, as policy, uses its own citizens as human shields. That is something that U.S. President Biden even said yesterday. And something we learned today was actually reported by the United Nations organization itself, the United Nations organization in charge of Gazan and Palestinian welfare for refugees, reported that Hamas had stolen fuel reserves and humanitarian aid from the schools, and that would have been fuel reserves that would have been enough to desalinate water in Gaza for 6 days.
So just for a point of clarity, has the ground incursion by the IDF officially begun as yet? We know that yesterday they were readying. Has it actually begun officially?
It has not begun. It is something that everyone is waiting for, kind of on tenterhooks. The ground invasion, should it actually kick off, will likely spark a very, very bloody and costly war to both Israelis and Palestinians. It is not something that Israel is taking lightly at all. And yet I will say that most of the Israeli home front is rallied to the cause. There has been a fundamental paradigm shift, Sally, in the last 10 days. Even Israeli peace activists are now saying that it is intolerable to live alongside the Hamas terror group. Something really changed in the Israeli psyche when Hamas came in across the border and killed 1,400 Israelis in one day, the vast majority of them civilians. And you cited about 150 hostages. That number is up to 199. So no, the ground invasion has not started yet. There's fear that the northern border would light up alongside it. Hezbollah took credit for mortaring IDF points on the northern border again today. I am a little bit, I might be a little bit unpolished in my appearance for this, for speaking with you right now, because I just told you before we started, I was caught in a Hamas rocket volley towards Tel Aviv and had to run to a stranger's building in order to shelter myself. And so this is the current reality. We are kind of in a holding pattern that is deeply uncomfortable for everyone, but the Israeli home front is largely united around the understanding that the Hamas terror group is insupportable to live alongside.
All right, so the ground incursion has not officially begun yet. We've heard that people who've moved to the south, some will be allowed through the border into Egypt. Do you have any more details about who's getting through?
I think you would have to direct those questions to the Egyptian government. The Egyptian government controls the Rafah crossing.
Yeah, okay, so what we have heard is that potentially foreigners might be allowed through. And yes, we are trying to get hold of the Egyptians as well. What is the latest death toll? Because at one point, you know, there were at least 1,500 Israelis killed, and then it was fairly similar on the Gazan side. But now it seems that the deaths in Gaza have increased exponentially.
Yes, one thing I would say, I'm sorry, I don't have the latest figures. I think it was in the mid-2000s. it seems almost callous to speak about human life this way. It's numbers that are so mind-boggling in their entirety of Israeli-Palestinian death that it almost feels like statistics now, but they're not statistics, these are human lives. And one thing that the Hamas-run Palestinian Health Ministry does not do is report out combatants versus non-combatants. So in Israel, we know that of the 1,400 killed, about 300 were soldiers, the rest were civilians. And we don't have the breakout of figures, but we know from past wars that the majority do seem to be Hamas combatants.
All right, thank you so much for that update. We're glad you're safe, and thank you so much for speaking to us this hour. That, of course, is Carrie Keller-Lynn. She's political and legal correspondent for the Times of Israel. We've got your sports news coming up next.